Okay, it's time now for some business news, and Catherine Bennett joins me here in the studio for that. And Catherine, China has just reported its GDP figures for 2020, and we can see that the economy there has made a rather impressive rebound despite that lingering COVID-19 pandemic.
Of course, and it is quite an impressive rebound, both in the scale of its recovery and in the speed of that recovery. Now, China is the only major economy in the world that has managed to avoid a contraction in 2020. Gross domestic product grew 2.3% last year, and that trend is set to continue. GDP should expand at its fastest pace in a decade this year. Now, the coronavirus outbreak effectively brought China to a standstill in the first quarter of 2020, and you can see that reflected in the figures there. The economy contracted by 6.8%, but it had already managed to return to growth by the second quarter, and by the final quarter of the year was up 6.5%. Now, to get some analysis of this, we can cross to our China correspondent, Charles Pellegrin. Charles, to start with, can you tell us what explains this remarkable recovery?
Well, first and foremost, what's behind this is China's decisive response to the COVID-19 pandemic on its own territory that's allowed work to resume and allowed supply chains to basically pick up where they left off. We've seen a V-shaped recovery. During the first quarter of 2020, the economy went down 6.8%, and then at the end of 2020 Q4, it went up 6.5%. And this was basically because China closed its borders and then did everything it could to stomp on any local transmission of the virus. After that, the export sector in China benefited. China is a huge producer of medical equipment and medical goods, so we've seen Chinese-made masks being exported around the world as well as other equipment. And in general, Chinese exporters have managed to gain market share on their foreign competitors, who often are still dealing with virus restrictions around the world. So really, China looking like it's coming out of this pandemic strengthened China's economy, as opposed to the rest of the world's economy that still appears to be quite weakened.
Now, for China, although this is still the slowest growth the country's seen in about 4 decades, as there are still some weak spots in the economy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely, still some sources of concern here for the Chinese economy. Retail consumptions over the year of 2020 are down 3.9%, even if there's been a slight uptick in the last quarter of the year. So that will be something to keep an eye on. Other matters of concern are the fact that external demand, international demand, is still considerably weaker because of the pandemic around the world. If the global economy is suffering because of the pandemic, that can't be good for China's economy as well, because all of these things are connected. And then there's all the things that China refers to as the external environment that can be quite concerning for policymakers here. And this includes the raft of tariffs, bans, and sanctions that have been imposed on the Chinese economy by the U.S. and other countries because of, for instance, the U.S. trade war against China to try and curb China's unfair trade practices, as Donald Trump coined them, or the tech rivalry between China and the U.S. with some U.S.-made components that are now increasingly more difficult to get inside the Chinese economy, or simply differences on human rights concerns. We're seeing some export bans for many products that are being made in the Xinjiang region in the west of China because of the policy towards the Uyghur minority there. So all of this will be one of the big questions that will be hanging over the incoming Biden administration in the U.S., meaning will they continue with this tough line against China, or will they try and have a more conciliatory approach?
Great. Thank you very much, Charles, for joining us there from Beijing. Now, just in this morning, Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong has been sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. A South Korean court convicted him of bribery, embezzlement and concealment of criminal proceeds. Lee has been the de facto head of Samsung since 2014. He already spent 1 year in prison back in 2017 after being convicted of playing a role in a corruption scandal that brought down the South Korean president. Samsung shares dropped 4% after the ruling. Now we can take a look at the market reaction to that story. Asian stocks are mixed in afternoon trade. Mainland Chinese stocks are up on the news of China's economic data, with the Shanghai Composite up 1%. The Hang Seng Index is also up by just under 1%. Stocks in Seoul plunging on the news of Lee's conviction, of course. Samsung is the world's biggest smartphone and memory chip maker, and the Kospi Index is leading losses in the region, declining by 2.5%. In Japan, the Nikkei also down by 1%. Now moving to the UK, where all travel corridors closed this morning in an attempt to stem the spread of coronavirus cases. But aviation executives say that it will further hurt an already struggling industry. Over the weekend, airport industry representatives warned that their sector needed more government support. Karen Dee, chief executive of the Airport Operators Association, said that airports were keeping infrastructure open in order to support services such as freight, military and the energy sector. But she warned that there is only so long that they can run on fumes before having to close temporarily. The sector wants the government to offer aid to help it cover regulatory, air traffic and business costs while the crisis continues. That's the end of the business section from me.
Okay, Catherine Bennett, thank you very much.